Well, good morning. I'm Stephen Ezel, Vice President of Global Innovation Policy here at the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation. And I want to welcome you to this event on scaling innovation, how the European Innovation Council can bolster Europe's competitiveness. Well, as Rob Atkinson and I wrote in our book, Innovation Economics, The Race for Global Advantage, countries increasingly understand that innovation drives long-term economic growth and improvements in quality of life and standards of living. So a fierce race for global innovation leadership has emerged as countries and supranational regions do all they possibly can to incubate, scale, attract, and grow industries and enterprises competing in the highest value-added sectors of economic activity, from clean energy and life sciences to advanced manufacturing. Of course, Europe has long been a highly innovative economy. In fact, one report prepared by Eric Bartelsman for the OECD actually found that the rates of innovation between US and European firms are exactly the same when you look at levels of new product launches, patenting, product announcements, etc. However, what Bartelsman found over time was that the United States had done a better job than Europe of more quickly allocating capital and labor, in other words, money and people, to the most promising innovative concepts and startup businesses, which enabled the United States to spawn and scale more winners, even though the underlying rates of innovation were roughly analogous. And that's certainly been true in the digital economy, for instance, where in 2016, North America had 82 digital platforms with over $3 trillion, employing some 350,000 employees, compared to just 27 digital platforms in Europe with a combined market capitalization of 181 billion. Likewise, a recent ITF report, who was winning the AI race, the United States, Europe, or China, found that while Europe actually has more artificial intelligence researchers than the other two regions, and actually produced more and better quality research, it's lagged behind the United States and Asia and China in bringing innovative new AI companies to the marketplace. But supporting and scaling the growth of promising young innovative companies is a challenge everywhere, not only in Europe. So we're excited to have today a fantastic set of speakers who will explore approaches for how the European Commission, individual nations, and even government agencies are implementing novel approaches to scale promising young entrepreneurs and innovative companies. And we're especially delighted to have as our keynote speaker this morning, Signe Ratzo, who is Deputy Director General for Research and Innovation with the European Commission. She'll explain how the new European Innovation Council has been designed as a key component of Horizon Europe to support high-risk, high-impact ideas, ideally turning science into new businesses and accelerating the scale-up of game-changing innovators shaping the future. After Signe's remarks, I'll introduce our all-star panel, including Jennifer Gerby, Nequan Orders, and John Kao. But as I said, Signe Ratzo is the Deputy Director General and a member of the Management Board of the Directorate General for Research and Innovation of the European Commission. She is also the Chief Negotiator for the Horizon Europe Association. She is further responsible for open innovation and for citizens' engagement in research and innovation policy for overall on international cooperation. Before joining DG RTD, she worked in various senior management positions in DG Trade since 2006, including most recently as Director for Trade, Strategy, Analysis, and Market Access in DG Trade. Before joining the Commission, Ms. Ratzo served from 1994 to 2005 as Deputy Secretary General at the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Communications for the Republic of Estonia. She holds a master's degree in trade and international economics from Estonia's Tartu University. Signe, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Many thanks, Steve, for your kind introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning to everybody. It's my great pleasure to be here with you today and introduce to you the European Innovation Council and the plans of the European Commission, how to further advance our innovation agenda. First of all, I'd like to thank very much ITIF for organizing this session here. It's good to see you all here, but as the event is also web streamed, so hopefully there are many more also followers of this session. Now I hope I will get my presentation on the screen.
Should be able to click forward to the next slide.
Okay, here it is. First of all, I'd like to just to say a few words what has been the underlying reasoning of setting up European Innovation Council. On the one hand, we know that Europe has excellent science. With a population of only 7% in the world, the EU accounts for 20% of funding of research and innovation. We have excellent science which is known worldwide. We have the European Research Council, which is really a beacon of excellence in science. But where we have not been as good yet is bringing the results of this excellent science to the market. What we are lacking yet is enough breakthrough and disruptive innovations that create new markets. We also have a financing gap between research and innovation grants and private investment for scaling up innovative startups. And finally, even if we have many national and local ecosystems, I know there are also the representatives of our member states here, we still have somewhat fragmented ecosystem at the European level. Now, what is the big question that is out there for all of us? Is namely who will lead the next wave of breakthrough and disruptive innovation. If we look back in history, then we will see that who have been the leaders in the past, well, starting from the first industrial revolution in the 19th century, when we speak about electricity, cars, synthetic chemicals, semiconductors, antibiotics, then the innovations have been both Europe and US-led. Now, currently, when the innovations are more and more related to digital, then clearly now the leadership has been here in the US with, well, clearly an important role still for Europe and more increasingly also for Asia. But now, looking into the future, when we think about hydrogen fuel cells, gene therapies, 3D printing, autonomous vehicles, which we just discussed here 2 days ago at the TRB across the street, more or less, then quantum computing, graphene, new batteries. We need new solutions for the batteries in order to make electric cars affordable to everyone. Then the question is still out there. In order to have this kind of leadership, we clearly need more investments. I mentioned the financing gap, and clearly the financing gap is most evident if you look at the figures of venture capital fundraising and compare the status of the US and the EU. I think this graph doesn't need any explanation in the sense that clearly this is an area where on the European side we really need to catch up. We understand how hard it is for high-risk projects to achieve private financing. That's why this is one of the areas we want really to address with the European Innovation Council to help the companies to come out of the high-risk zone in order to also make these projects more attractive to the private investors. And we already have good examples on the basis of the pilot of the EIC, to which I can refer a bit later. Now, this is also the slide which does not need a lot of explanation. When we look at the number of unicorn companies, tech startup companies that reaches $1 billion market value, then clearly you can see who are leaders here, the US and more in Asia. So really, this is also an area we need to catch up. On the other hand, the good news is that we have a very lively European tech ecosystem. You can see the major, also the centers in Europe on this map. However, bringing these hotbeds together in a more integrated way, creating partnerships and enabling them to complement each other is also one of the objectives of the European Innovation Council. So, what is the story behind it? Our former commissioner, Carlos Moedas, who actually has a private sector experience, clearly when he came into the office back in 2014, it was the time when we were still starting with the current framework program Horizon 2020, understood what is still missing there. Clearly, the measures which could help the innovators bringing the products to the market, and then we brought together leading innovators all over Europe, in order to really to start to design the structure of the European Innovation Council. And among these are innovators, entrepreneurs, business angels, venture capitals, CEOs, really a fantastic group of innovators who are brought together to support the Commission, to design in the design of the EIC. And they drafted the report, which was called Europe is Back, Supporting European Innovation, which really highlighted what the Commission needed to do in order to unleash really the potential of innovators and innovative researchers. We also then, well, clearly the innovators also looked for good examples worldwide, and clearly the DARPA model was something which was also inspiring them. They have been working, and the Commission has continued to work together also with MIT, DARPA experts, in order to share good practices also on managerial processes. Also now we have used these opportunities to train program managers who are also part of this system to do their trainings here in the States, and to also have the joint trainings in the EU. Now, when we proposed the draft, prepared the draft proposal of Horizon Europe, the framework program for the next 7 years, and already with the European Innovation Council as part of that, then the European leaders were very encouraged by that proposal, that they asked us actually already to start with a pilot before the program starts. So this is something which we have been doing since then, and now I'd like to briefly describe how the European Innovation Council will look like. It has been created as a one-stop shop for breakthrough and disruptive innovators. And the first step was to bring together the scattered different instruments that we already had in order to support the innovators. It's open to all innovators in any field at any time, and it's really the highest potential innovators which are selected on the basis of their ideas and also on the basis of their team. Because what we introduced here is also the face-to-face interviews with the real experts in different parts of the innovation, starting from the financing, really assessing the novelty of the technology or the service, up to actually assessing the management team, whether this is really the team who can bring this innovation to the market. So these are all the elements on the basis of which the project proposals are being assessed and are being selected. So really, the idea is to have agile funding from idea to investment. And there are two parts of the EIC. Pathfinder grants for advanced research on emerging technologies and accelerator funding, which is meant for innovative startups. And the idea really here to give, so to say, the seed money, so to speak, and crowd in private investment as a result of that. Using also the other instruments that we have, like InvestEU. And finally, the objective, as I mentioned, we already have a vibrant ecosystem, but also building ecosystems and communities in Europe as a whole. So there is also access to mentoring and advisory services, to knowledge partners, expert program managers, whom we are training together with the US experts, as mentioned, and also prizes for breakthrough technologies. Now for the pilot, you can also see the funding for the pilot phase, say nearly 3 billion euros for the first 3 years. This is something which we've already been able to use, and which is paving the way for the next phase, for the full scaling up of the Innovation Council. So now the first phase, which was launched already in 2018, brought together relevant Horizon 2020 schemes in one place. Because we used to have different instruments like SME instrument, fast track to innovation, FET open and prizes. Then it also introduced open support for startups and SMEs. Formerly there were predefined themes, now it's totally bottom up. Also introduction of interviews with experienced innovators, as I just described, and also the launch of major prizes for breakthrough innovations. So now in the second phase, which was launched in 2019, already with an increased budget, so 2.2 billion for the 2 years, 2019-2020. We also introduced Pilot Pathfinder with 6 strategic emerging technologies, and introduced Pilot Accelerator. First in the history, so to speak, introducing in addition to the grants also the possibilities to have equity financing. And this is clearly a new element. We also set up a new EIC Advisory Board, bringing leading innovators together for the ongoing assistance to the further design and also the implementation. And first EIC program managers have been recruited to actively engage with the Pathfinder projects. And the blended finance for the first projects was also selected. Here you will see the EIC Advisory Board, which, as I said, brings together 22 experts coming from different, well, clearly representing the CEOs, the innovators, also the venture capital funds. So really having the expertise from all fields and also from different member states. And also from associated countries. Now, what we've seen in the also as a result of the first pilot phase has been that actually there has been huge interest. Namely, the first call in October last year received a massive demand. Around 1,800 applications requesting 5.2 billion. Also with exponential potential namely particularly for the blended finance. So there was really a great demand for the blended finance. And actually, we had a very difficult task of refusing also proposals which we had to reject due to the lack of finance. But we have the possibility of using the so-called seals of excellence measure, meaning that the projects will get, so to say, the seal of excellence, but they could be financed from other financing measures. So you don't need then to do the project selections anymore, but they are already, so to say, ripe for being financed. Actually, also, you know, we have the first results of the EIC Accelerator pilot, which by the end of 2018 had attracted already 3 billion of private follow-up funding. So, meaning that each €1 of public money invested has generated 2.5 euros of private investment within 3 years. So, meaning that these are already very good results. Now, what we are looking forward for the full-fledged EIC for the next framework program, Horizon Europe, just to mention to you that our framework programs are the largest globally, European framework programs, for the current period of 76 billion euros for 7 years, and what we propose for the next period is 100 billion euros for the next 7 years. We still need to see when the co-legislators, that is the member states in the Council and the European Parliament, agree on the overall budget, hopefully this year, then how much money will be allocated for Horizon Europe. Within this budget, what is proposed is to have 10 billion euros for the third pillar, including European Innovation Council, but we can already see that on the basis of the pilot that the demand will be much bigger. Then we will have also dedicated governance with the EIC President and Advisory Board, also more flexible rules for funding. Really, we need an instrument which is agile because the innovations, the market doesn't wait. So we really need to have an agile instrument. Increased role of the program managers who are being also trained, as I mentioned. Then the full accelerator funding with both grant and blended finance, full Pathfinder scheme, and fast-track holders for Horizon grant holders. And also creation of the EIC Forum with member state innovation agencies. As said, we need to create better synergies with the member states in what we are doing. And one part of that is also identifying for the EIC board will be to identify market barriers for scaling up of the companies. So it's not only the access to finance that the innovators need. They also need the markets where they can really scale up their products. And that's why we have in European legislation the so-called innovation principle, meaning that when creating new regulations, we also need to make sure that we will not create unnecessary barriers for the new innovations. Because very often we don't know how these will look like. So we should not have the regulation which is prescribing the solutions, but rather a regulation that enables further solutions. Thank you very much. With that, I will conclude my presentation. And if you'd like to find more, you can refer to our webpage. Thank you very much, and looking forward to further questions later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Signe. That was absolutely fantastic. I should note also that you have been so kind to allow us to post these slides online, so you can find a PDF there for for the reference. All right, now let me introduce our all-star panel who will provide additional comment. We'll start with Jenny Gerby, who serves as the Associate Director for Technology and as a Program Director at the Advanced Research Projects Agency, Energy, or ARPA-E, part of DOE. Jenny is responsible for supporting the Deputy Director for Technology in oversight of all technology issues relating to ARPA-E's programs, as well as assisting with program development, fellow recruitment, and coordinating project management across the agency. Before joining ARPA-E, Jenny worked at Dow Corning in multiple capacities, most recently as an applied engineering and technical services leader, and previously in the company's business and technology incubator. She holds a PhD in materials science from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Next, we'll hear each of the speakers for about 8 to 10 minutes each from Nequan Orders, who is a professor of economics and international affairs at George Washington University. His research and graduate level teaching focuses on subjects including the economics of technological change, science and technology policy, international transfer of technology, and inter-firm cooperation in R&D. Nicholas also holds a joint appointment with the Center for International Science and Technology Policy with the Columbian School of Arts and Sciences. Nicholas holds an MA in Economic Development from Leicester University in England, and a Master's in Philosophy and PhD in Economics from New York University. Last but not least on the beam is John Kao. He is the president of the Institute for Large-Scale Innovation. John is a leading authority on innovation, business creativity, and organizational transformation, who has been dubbed Mr. Creativity and as a serial innovator by The Economist. He has advised numerous countries, including Finland and Singapore, on the development of their national innovation policies. He is the author of the best-selling books Innovation Nation and Jamming, The Art and Discipline of Business Creativity. John is really a true polymath, or as he would prefer to be described, a nexalist. John, you'll have to explain what nexalism means. He is also a jazz pianist and is a Tony-nominated producer on film and stage. He was producer of the Broadway play Golden Child, and executive producer of the film Mr. Baseball. John holds an MD from Yale Medical School and also an MBA from Harvard Business School. With that, Jenny, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Delighted to be here today. It's not too far away from where our offices are, so that's nice for us. I don't have to be on a robot, but I appreciate that. I think that's very interesting. I'm going to tell you a little bit about ARPA-E. I know a lot of you might not know about us, so I'm going to keep it short, but I'm going to talk a little bit about why we were founded, the culture there and how we work, and why we can be successful as a small agency, because we are quite small. So I'm going to start off with breaking all the rules of PowerPoint. You don't have to read this, but I put up our authorizing language from Congress. This is why we exist. And the important thing to note here is that it is very short. And it says what we should do and how we should do it. And what we should do is enhance the economic and energy security of the United States through reducing imports, reducing emissions, improving energy efficiency. So when you think about that, that is an incredibly broad mandate. So we're supposed to solve energy problems for the country. We are a solution-focused agency. That's something I'm going to talk about again, but that's actually very important about what we do. So we work on things that are very high risk that nobody else will touch. But we don't just do in the lab research, we also are allowed to try to help transform those things to the market. So we do not just look at technology, we also look at market. We look at those two things together. And that is the only way you can solve problems is by bringing technology and market together. And we do that from day one, thinking about what we're going to do. Another note that I think is important is here's the DOE org chart. There we are. There is not a whole lot between us and the secretary. This is something else that's very important. So we are a very, very flat organization. We do not have middle managers. We are all term limited, so we come for 3 to 5 years and then we all leave. So it makes recruiting very exciting. It means that we self-select for people that are comfortable with risk, which is exactly who we would want. It means we're bringing new ideas in all the time, but it also means that we're not competitive. There is no promotion. There is no rating you against your colleagues. So we are run by this core of what's called program directors. These program directors come in, they're the ones who decide what we do. Okay. And we are all about if it works, doesn't matter. So again, it's really like new business development for the country. There is no point in us funding research if there is nowhere for that research to go. So that research has to say, okay, well, in order to be adopted, what does the solution need to look like? So we say, what problem should we solve? What does the solution need to look like? That is extremely important. And one of the things that has always frustrated me personally, which is why I love being at this agency, is seeing people do amazing, great science on things that end up not mattering. And you could, if they would talk to market people, should know that from the beginning. So there's a lot involved in deciding what the problems are you want to solve. Okay? So here are our current program directors, and our model is the following. So when we actually come in and interview at the agency, we actually give a program pitch. So there's a fair amount of work that you do in order even just to interview at the agency. Then we come in and we have the freedom to talk to whoever we want to talk to, go wherever we want in the country, and really work hard on deciding, again, what's the problem to be solved and why and what should that solution look like. We have teams where we have somebody called a tech to market advisor who is another Fed, who's a market person. That's on our team. We have PhD Texitas. So we have a small team, but that helps us right from the beginning sort of combine those two things. And so we often have a workshop that's sort of invite only, with maybe 60 to 70 people. So we're talking to everybody, both who would be the people that are inventing and innovating what we need, but then who would make it, who would buy it, who would use it. We go all the way down the value chain and look at that and identify fatal flaws that are everywhere in there. Maybe there's a potential fatal flaw in the supply chain. Maybe it's cost. There's many different things that could be. And we try to grab all of that and put it into the metrics of our programs. So we end up pitching internally to the agency, to each other. And then once that is approved internally, then we actually have a pretty involved process where we have concept papers and full apps. We have 2 rounds of external reviewers. We bring external reviewers on site to have a panel. So we vet these things very thoroughly. But we do not just choose the highest rated proposals. What we do is we put together a portfolio of multiple technical pathways to solve the problem, because we know most of them aren't going to work. Okay? So once we do that, we then actively manage the programs. And again, this is something that's different from other agencies out there. We have quarterly reviews with every single project we have. We are in there looking at the data, how it's managed, what they're doing. We work together. We help advise them. And you know what? We often shut projects down because somebody might do great work to show that this technical pathway isn't going to succeed. I think that's a win as long as they publish it so nobody else does that, right? So then we'll support them to publish that and then we'll agree to mutually terminate. So that happens all the time. We also might pivot. So there might be a group that says, you know what, a pathway we tried, we show that can't work, but from what we learned, we would like to propose a new pathway. And if that makes sense, we have the freedom to do that too. Maybe the 2 or 3 projects out of the portfolio that end up sort of doing very well, which is always a surprise because this is high-risk research, we can plus them up and give them more money and more time. So we have the freedom to continuously do this, which I think is extremely important. And then again, we have this tech-to-market person on the teams that helps these teams figure out how to move forward. They'll work on pitch slides with them. They'll say, well, what's going to be your IP strategy? So it's really, they're right there with them right from the beginning to help these teams be successful. So this model has worked very well for us. And it's only possible, again, because we have these program directors that are completely empowered and also term limited. Those things are very important to us. Again, we're not competitive. We all work together all the time. We all vet each other's things. We're a very collaborative, peer-driven structure. And leadership does not decide what happens. The PDs decide what happens. The amount that we control is, all right, we probably shouldn't have 4 people in transportation or 5 electrochemists. We want a variety and a diversity of program directors. But other than that, we do not have roadmaps, and I think that's very important. We'll fund anybody. So in the same program, we might fund GE, we might fund a 3-person startup, we might find a collaboration between a national lab and academia. We don't care. We'll fund anybody. Again, very flat organization, tech and market considered simultaneously. And then finally, we have flexible funding vehicles. So what I've talked about is sort of our standard model of focused programs. But what we have done in the past couple of years is design some more flexible vehicles so that we can do, we just had a big SBIR seedling that happened under something called TINA, that's Topics Informing New Areas. So we can do a lot of different things like that, resource teams, mini programs. And then something called Startup, which is open right now. This is crucial. So what Startup is, it is to fund previously funded RPE work that filed IP, that has difficulty getting over that next valley of death, which is proving that something from the lab can be scaled up to something industrially relevant. We have identified that there's a real gap there and that we're not necessarily de-risking things enough for there to be follow-on funding for a lot of this work. So this is a $50 million FOA that is a little bit unusual. It requires partners and 50% cost share. And it's designed to help tech that RPE is funded before move forward to the next stage. And I'm very excited about that. Our current portfolio, it's all over the map. So we have programs in transportation. We have programs looking at biofuels or the amount of energy that's used in agriculture. We have aquaculture, looking at our grid and resilience and how much renewables we can put on that grid. High power electronics. New ways to use AI and optimizing design spaces for systems. I mean, we are all over the map. And this is a representation of the fact that we have such a diversity of program directors from so many different areas. It should move forward. This is the test because it's tech, so I'm an experimentalist. If somebody can, aim back there? If somebody can move it forward, if this won't work. There isn't too much left, but I wanted to show, oh, I just skipped it. So looking at the impact of our agency, this is something that's always difficult when you are a high-risk agency because a lot of the stuff we work on is pretty far from market. Some of the stuff is closer to market. So one of the things that we've looked at is we did an audit looking very carefully at follow-on funding for our teams, and we only recorded the follow-on funding directly applicable to the tech that we funded. So a company might score 20 million in their follow-on funding, but maybe only 4 was actually related to RPE. And even taking that conservative approach, it's actually probably 3 billion now, because we had quite a few teams get more recently. So and this is not the way to think of us. We are not investors, okay? So we've probably spent $2 billion, and our teams have gotten 3 in follow-on funding. So that's not necessarily why we do it, but I think it is an important factor in saying that, look, we have de-risked a fair amount of technology for the private sector to pick up, and I think that's very important. We can look at patents, we can look at journal articles. All of these things are a little bit difficult because what we really do is form a new community to solve a problem. And that community will then influence another community. And you can actually look maybe at the patents or pubs and actually see where that new work has gone and then influence something else. So we keep working on this and we keep trying to explain why we work well. But when you actually look at case studies of our teams and how they've succeeded, it's pretty impressive what RPE has managed to do over the short 10 years we've been in existence and the amount of money we've had, considering how lean the agency is and how few people are there. So it's been a pleasure explaining the agency to you. Hopefully I've sort of explained why it's important. One final note is, it's been difficult in the US. So many large private companies have basically gotten rid of their R&D capabilities, or they only have relatively small amounts of focused R&D, and they go out and they actually acquire small businesses. That's sort of their mode now, as opposed to having in-house R&D. And it's a challenge because if you want to solve problems for the country and you're going to go out and talk to people, if you're seen as a competitor, you're not going to get to talk to everybody you want to talk to. People aren't going to tell you everything. But at some place like RPE, people tell us everything. It's amazing the amount of access that we have, and it enables us to decide in a much more accurate way what problems we should solve and what that solution should look like. So there is a huge place for government-funded work in this space because we're not competing with anybody, and I think that's really important. Okay? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jenny. Nick.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting me here. I'm Nequan Orders from the George Washington University. I will, as a faculty member, I will take my role of criticizing, so I will ask a few questions specifically on the presentation from Europe, just in order to start the conversation. I must start by saying that some of us living in the United States these days are very envious of countries and regions like Europe, like China, like India, like everybody else who can target specific problems and close to the market and go try solve them because we have certain limitations. Nevertheless, what was presented here raises some questions. Let me go straight into this, and perhaps we get into a little discussion on this. First, the framework programs of which this is part of used to be the programs that supported generic research, not innovation. They were specifically kept out of innovation for two reasons. First, because the shadow government in Brussels felt uncertain to support this or the other individual companies. If they supported an Italian company, maybe France would stand up and say, well, why do you support them and not us? The same problem we have in the United States. And this is one of the reasons why the federal government is traditionally has been shy of entering into innovation, not research, innovation. The second reason that the framework programs were kept away from innovation was that innovation is a very local thing. It's an ecosystem thing, as we heard here. And the program from Brussels will do nothing, actually, to improve the ecosystem down in Athens or in Paris or in any other place of Europe. So the idea was that Brussels or Washington or any capital cities too far away from where innovation happens, actually. And thus they cannot really do things very competitively in that front. Now that seems to have changed, and of course even the DG, the Director General, has been renamed into Research and Innovation DG. So one discussion, one question would be, what has changed in Europe in this respect? Now. We talked about ecosystems here. Ecosystems were mentioned, and I wanted to raise the question then in this respect, why the same things could not have been achieved with supporting local programs, as Europe already does. Europe has structural programs which support innovation in the individual countries. Why, for example, the SBIR, that is already everywhere in Europe, programs like the SBIR could not achieve the same purpose. So that's question, the first question, question number one. The second has to do with evaluation. Now, when the previous style of European programs, the framework programs for research, were being evaluated, the questions were around additionality. It was input additionality, output additionality, behavior additionality. And that meant input additionality meant how much additional resources did you throw into the system? Not substituting what exists, but additional ones. The output additionality was what were the outputs out of this? What additional outputs did you get? And the behavior additionality was what new behaviors did you create through these programs, right? For research programs, this has been fairly well understood questions. I wanted to ask now, what are the measures, the indicators that you will use in the future when the policy masters, the political masters will ask, what did you do with this $10 billion now? How is this program going to be evaluated? A third thing that I wanted to raise here is that the program, when I look at the presentation and the documents that are out there, is actually looking at those game changers, those companies that will become the unicorns, those companies that will go great in the market, that will really carry Europe to the world. But these are the companies that usually do not want to go to the public sector. These companies are taken care of by the private sector, right? The very top ones, right? I want to make sure we understand what I'm talking about. The ones that have the best possibilities to succeed usually do not have a lot of problem getting funded by the private sector. It is a little bit below them, the companies that are still innovative, but have a difficulty. They face the market gap in terms of funding, right? Not the ones that will fly anyway. So my question here is, because this has been raised in the European framework programs before, over and over again, evaluation of European programs have shown that really the top companies do not participate very much because they don't want to deal with bureaucracy. Public money means bureaucracy, right? So if they have alternatives, they go to the alternatives. So this is a discussion of whether the program will actually attract or has been attracting already, maybe, those excellent companies, right, that Europe produces. Now, the fourth set of issues that I wanted to raise here is that we are talking about a program here, and this is related to something I said before, that is going to the last mile of innovation, right? The last mile. It's not the research, it's the product, and it is the marketing of the product, and it's the funding of the innovation, and those things are very much local phenomena. Europe itself has a major program in smart specialization, correct? And that's exactly what smart specialization is trying to do. It's trying to define which are the strengths of particular regions with very, very interesting methodologies in order to actually focus the regions in companies and in areas of production which make sense with the regions. My question here is how this program, if this program, and how links to those efforts of Europe, of smart specialization. And I will leave it at that because I think already we have a lot of questions. But this is, let me finish, but that this is commentable. This program, of course, tries to answer some difficult questions that Europe had to answer in earlier times, questions that the United States also faced. If you remember, if you are old enough like me, we faced similar questions in the 70s and 80s when the United States was spending more than the next 6 countries combined, but was falling behind in innovation compared to Japan. So those times are gone now, particularly with Japan. But the questions remain, and Europe faces the same. It feels it spends a lot of research, but it's not getting enough in terms of innovation. And this is an effort. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Nick. And we can take up those questions after the panelists speak and really respond. John, the floor is yours.
So this is the first time that I've presented as a cyborg, so this is a bit of an experiment. I wanted to comment partly from the vantage of an ex-academic, so I won't be as much a critic, I think, as hopefully a catalyst for the conversation. My 14 years at Harvard Business School kind of equipped me to think in a conceptual way about these issues, but it was really mixing it up with leaders of countries, cities, municipalities, states that gave me whatever clinical perspective I'm going to share with regard to the EU's, the European Innovation Council's very, I think, remarkable plan. The vision, I think, is extraordinary, and it's game-changing, and it moves. It has the potential to move the needle, and so the need for making some wise design choices, I think, early on is particularly important. Innovation, to me, is, Marvin Minsky said that there were certain words that were, he called them suitcase words, because you had to unpack them to get their full meaning out, and innovation, to me, is definitely one of those words. If we look at it from a historical perspective, I actually think about innovation as having had four historical periods. The industrial era, where we learned about manufacturing efficiencies and learning curve effects and quality and so forth and so on. Second, the Silicon Valley model, which is killer apps and cubicles and early stage venture capital and a certain kind of culture. The third, what I would talk about is human-centered innovation, which borrows very much from the disciplines of design thinking and behavioral economics and psychology. And now entering into a fourth realm, which is really about purpose-driven innovation and partakes of the global discussion about how to implement action around the SDGs, about what is the really purpose of innovation to drive us towards a desired future. So I have a few points to make, one of which is really about this issue of purpose, because if technological innovation in the narrower sense is the goal, or it's the answer that's being sought by this program, what's the question that's on the table? Jennifer, I think, usefully pointed out the importance of the mission statement in terms of driving the overall effort. And I think there is an opportunity to really articulate some bold, overarching elements of purpose that could be quite important. I think that there is a latent opportunity here to use the scale of capital being deployed also to drive the development of human assets / capacity / talent within the European context. Many of you are aware of the fact that there's a revolution going on right now in terms of personal learning records, the digitization of credentials, the passing of power from institutions to individuals, and the ability of increasing ability of learners at all levels to be able to craft their own pathways towards the goals that they want to serve. I'm part of a task force of several major digital companies that are at this very moment trying to figure this out. And I think it has tremendous implications, not only for job-related skill development and reinventing career arcs, but also for fostering the kind of entrepreneurial and innovation capacity in society that I think will be critically important, maybe not over the first few years, but over the first few decades, to creating an innovative and entrepreneurial Europe at an even higher level. The notion of coupling, I mean, there is a mention of coaching and mentoring in the documents I reviewed. I'd love to know more about that, having spent 25 years coaching and teaching innovators and entrepreneurs, and still, finding it quite a head scratcher and feeling very much like a beginner. But the whole notion of creating learning opportunities for the entrepreneurs, for the scientists who come into the program, I think is critically important. There's the discussion of the programs for the program managers, which I think is equally important. But this is a historic opportunity to spread innovation and entrepreneurship-related knowledge and capacity throughout the fabric of society. And in so doing, to also address a word that Jennifer used, which I find very appealing as well, which is community. I think that, one model is money goes to a talented team and they do something, and another is that because of the scale of activities, there are massive opportunities for cross-linking of opportunities and for creating ecosystems, which I agree can be local, as Nicholas said, but really local is global these days as well. And people who have shared interests in certain streams of technology or certain opportunity sets, can reach out regardless of time and space. I think that another point I would raise is the whole notion of culture, and the whole notion of culture specifically in relation to the notion of failure. People are constantly, I'm in San Francisco, and people are constantly coming looking for the secrets of Silicon Valley. And I tell them that the one absolute advantage that America still enjoys is tolerance of failure and tolerance of wacky ideas, and a forgiveness of failure. And the notion actually that failure can be the most valuable kind of learning if you're an entrepreneur. One tip for you, a career tip, not that any of you need it, is if a venture capitalist says to you, what's your biggest failure in the course of their first conversation with you, give them an authentic, a juicy answer. They want to know not only the scope of the failure, but what you learned from it, because that, the assumption is, will make you a much better entrepreneur the next time around. How the whole notion of a motivating, community-oriented culture of innovation, a collaborative culture, coexists with the whole notion of a tolerance of failure, and how that's built into really the culture of this initiative as articulated. It also relates to this notion of venture capital. I mean, a lot of the venture capitalists I meet in Europe, really I think of as more private equity or even commercial banking. The secret sauce of initiating new innovative things using venture capital is also about the extreme early stage, almost intuitively based investing, which certain people in the Bay Area and Boston and other centers of venture capital are so good at, which is ferreting ideas out before they've become mainstream, before they've been anointed by, a usual panel of experts, but are raw and therefore quite interesting. I think Europe also has an opportunity to inventory its unique assets in terms of being test beds for large-scale research. There's lots of discussion about global AI competition. Really, AI competition, to some extent is about what happens in the laboratory and the academy, but it's equally about the ability to generate massive amounts of data in relevant areas and to have relevant problems to bring to the table that the algorithms and the ability to generate data can actually combine to create useful outcomes. And so thinking about where those natural opportunities for experimentation are, which lead inevitably to ventures that may not be built around a leading edge technology as much as an insight into a marketplace or a design exercise that's about a latent set of human requirements that could be satisfied in a different kind of way, I think are also very much a part of the innovation process. And so looking at all aspects of the value chain and incorporating those into the criteria, I think, for the investments becomes really important, I think, as well. I think that, having had the experience of freeing up technology from, famous American universities, I can testify that even in places that are considered to be sophisticated, it's often very hard to do. It's tough negotiation, and there's a academia, entrepreneurial, cultural divide. And I imagine that divide exists maybe even in a more florid way in other parts of the world. So what would it be like to actually also attend to the needs of people who are in the position of technology transfer and to be able to, in a sense, acculturate them into the realities of innovation and entrepreneurship in a way that creates more empathy? So, I could go on and on. As Stephen said, he used the word nexialism, which is actually a word derived from an old science fiction novel about someone who had so many interdisciplinary capabilities that they were able to make a difference with complex, wicked problems. I don't know if that accurately describes me, but there are many things that can be said that are very positive about this expanded initiative in Europe, and I for one salute it, and also want to make sure that it flies with the best wisdom that's available.
Great, thank you very much, John. So let me just open it briefly to the panel to comment on any points or questions or topics raised by co-panelists, and then we can open it up to audience Q&A. Go ahead, Signa. Oh, yes, let me give you this one. Actually,
okay.
easier.
Well, thanks a lot. First of all, many thanks for the other panel speakers for your presentations and comments, which were really have given rise to a lot of things going on in my head, which I'd like to comment. I was just wondering whether I could also show the slide which I did not prepare for this presentation, but which actually shows the whole structure of Horizon Europe program. So it's not only this innovation part, but it's much broader. Namely, I'd like to comment on a few things that, clearly Jennifer mentioned, which I've understood that ARPA-E is really it's part of your mission. Really, you have a very clear direction. And the mission statement, which is very clear. So directionality is one of the things I'd like to comment, namely also related to the SDGs and the major challenges that we have. Then what I'd also like to comment is on the experimentation, how we look at that, and then clearly also the issues that Nicholas has raised. Now, on the directionality, first of all, if we look at Horizon Europe structure, then it's the 10 billion of EIC innovation-related part is the third pillar, but it's only one-tenth of the overall program. So the major part, which is the second pillar, is namely is related to the global challenges and industrial competitiveness, and this is really the part which has a very clear directionality. And the first pillar, which is ERC, Marie Curie, this is mainly the fundamental research, which is bottom up. So the first and the third pillars are bottom up. And the second pillar, which accounts for half.
We have the slides up for you. If you...
Oh, okay. You have the slides. Well, excellent. Well, perhaps then it's better if I come here. Excellent. No, I'll just. Oh, okay. First of all, on the directionality part and the relation with the SDGs. So we have only one quantitative target in our program. That is 35% of the budget should be related to tackling climate change. And overall, the whole program has to find the solutions to the SDGs. So it has the relation to the SDGs. So clearly, this relation and the directionality is there. Now, when I'm going to show you the structure, here you can see the three pillars. The first one is European Research Council. As I said, the bottom up, the fundamental research. The second pillar is mainly applied research in different clusters. You also see that the clusters are now much more interlinked than in the current program, if you are familiar with the current program. For instance, we bring together climate, energy, mobility in one cluster, food, bioeconomy, natural resources in one cluster, and so on and so forth. And then the third pillar is namely the EIC pillar. And what I'd like to have much more, clearly the ambition is to have real impact with our program. Not only research impact, which is the easiest actually to measure, how many cited articles you have and so on and so forth, how many patents. Then the economic impact, for which we also have the indicators actually, how many additional GDP and jobs your investment in research and innovation is creating. But also impact on the societies, which is much more difficult to measure, but clearly the ambition is there. So we clearly have this kind of directionality that John mentioned. Now, another thing which I'd like to show to you, now here you have also the comparisons. Well, what are the main now the key novelties in the program as compared to the current one? Well, supporting breakthrough innovation council that I just introduced, but also now creating more impact, and we are doing that through the so-called mission orientation and citizen involvement. So research and innovation missions is one of the ways actually to create, to have more impact. So what do we mean by the missions? These are related to research and innovation, but they are not just about research and innovation. They are actually about finding solutions to some of the major challenges that our societies are facing, some of the major transformations that our societies are facing, ecological, climate-related, social, economic, digital. So we'd like to have stronger visibility of the benefits that research and innovation are creating for the society, for the citizens, and also with clearer impact. And for that, we actually have as an inspiration, John Kennedy's mission Man to the Moon, which has been the inspiration, but now have been translated into the main challenges that our societies are facing today. So far, we have already agreed, that is the member states, the Council and the European Parliament has agreed what should be the broad mission areas. And now within, and you see them on the screen, John doesn't, I'll just mention very quickly, adaptation to climate change, including societal transformations, cancer, soil health and food, climate neutral and smart cities, healthy oceans, seas, and so on. And within these mission areas, now with the help of the mission boards, who bring together also innovators, policymakers, now we will define clearer missions, also engaging with the citizens, learning what are the real issues there, what are the real problems that the citizens and the societies are facing, and then coming up with the mission areas which have to then also find the solutions, innovative solutions, but also policy-related solutions, because that's why we are also working together with the regulators, with the policymakers in all of that. And here also comes the experimentation that John mentioned, namely experimentation, experimenting with these potential solutions. When it comes to the energy, when it comes to the mobility solutions, then they also need to be tested on the ground in different member states, taking into consideration also the differences in attitudes, in policies. We need to find the solutions which are accepted by the society, by the citizens, and they can be accepted also if they have been tested with the active participation of them. When it comes to the automated cars, for instance, when it comes to the energy solutions which are closer to the citizens, creating their own solar energy, for instance, and things like that. So these are then the additional means that we have in our program. And this leaves then the third pillar, EIC, mainly bottom up, but still, as you've seen, clearly they won't avoid the big challenges. So also the innovators are there to find the solutions for these big challenges. So they are clearly also related with those. Now let me check the questions that Nicholas has put for me, which clearly shows that he's very well informed about the current program, as well as the for the EIC. Let me see where I have the EIC one. Yeah, with the current program. Now, what has changed? Why would we need that? Well, it's clear, as I mentioned, that we have clearly in different member states, we have already vivid ecosystem. But as I mentioned, what have been the problems is, first, if we compare ourselves with the competitors, we have not been able to create as many groundbreaking, market-creating innovations as our competitors. You've seen the comparison with the unicorns. By the way, coming from a nation which has the highest number of unicorns per number of population, Estonia has a population of 1.3 million and already has 4 unicorns out of some 34 for all Europeans for the time being. Well, I guess Skype is one of the famous ones, which had to find to go out in order to find additional funding. Also, what I'm now using TransferWise card here, which is another, also the unicorn company, which enables us to change your money without the involvement of the banks, so no fees. So when I'm just buying here in US dollars, so I can be sure that I don't need to pay anything for the banks for that. So that, just to show a few of these solutions. So clearly the aim is now also to find then the possibilities for the startup companies in Europe to have access to finance by means of the EIC, crowding in private investment from the banks, from the EIB, but also from the private investors, business angels, in order to actually, when I put in the equity, the purpose is not to stay there in the company, but actually to find then the private investors, and then to get out from there. But give additional possibilities really for these companies to scale up in Europe first, and then also globally. And the member states have agreed that this is something which is needed. It's not enough what the member states are putting into their innovation infrastructure in the member states, but we really need something European-wide. And clearly the first results already show that the demand is there. Now, as I mentioned, we also have the measures actually to support the further development of ecosystems in places, in member states, in regions. So this is also part of the picture, creating better synergies so that they can really work better together and also learn from each other. That's why we also have the European Innovation Board, where all the member states will be represented. And when it comes to the evaluations, then clearly the same principle as in the ERC pertains that the best projects will be financed. So there is really, from wherever the projects come, it doesn't matter. Only the best one are getting financed. And then what is the role of the private sector? Clearly, the crowding in of the private sector is the purpose. Now, what are the indicators? One of those is really how much of additional private funding we can create. We already have the first figures on the basis of the pilots that I also mentioned. But in the end, how many really are the new innovative ideas can be scaled up in the markets will be the real results of the EIC, which actually will start as of 2021. So we don't know yet, but we can already learn lessons on the basis of the pilot, and also then to see whether there are still some details that can be changed in terms of the design of the EIC when it will be already be started as a fully fledged scheme. So I think I touched upon the main issues, but would be happy to come back.
All right, let's open up the floor for questions. I'll take them as I see them. Would you please identify your name and organization you're with? Thank you. Go ahead, Charles.
I'm Charles Wessner at Georgetown University. Let me congratulate the panel on a very interesting set of presentations, and particularly congratulate the EU on this remarkable set of measures. I would like to ask just a couple of questions, and while I'm complimentary about the scale and the clear learning that has been involved here, I wanted to ask our RPE representative that's an amazing set of inputs you have. I'd just like to know if there are any sales at some point. We don't need to answer that immediately, but
Any sales? What do you mean? Sorry?
Did you sell, are the products you found being sold?
There are multiple technologies out right now.
Okay, well, I didn't see that on the...
Well, there are many, and they're relatively small, so I put the slide together. We have books that we give out to Congress that have slick sheets of all the different...
I'd look
yeah.
forward to that. I mean, again, that's not a criticism of the program, just when we're doing measurements, that's often when we tend to focus on inputs rather than... And I wanted to ask Director Retso whether or not you think that the program is anywhere near the scale that it needs. I'm utterly confused. You were comparing venture capital, and you had the U.S. and Europe. Did you leave out anyone? Like China, perhaps? And I would suggest that, and then a question, what measures do you have to avoid massive purchasing, either by the U.S., but certainly by our Chinese colleagues? I think my time is up here, but...
And while you're reflecting on that question, let's take Ken's as well, and then you can answer them together.
Ken Jarbo, currently retired. I want to put Director Retso on the spot as well. Feel free to ignore this question if you wish. As I understand it, you went to both MIT and DARPA for kind of comparison and learning and training of your program managers. What didn't you like about what MIT and DARPA was telling you? What could we learn from your experience in going through that process?
Go ahead.
First of all, clearly the comparison was here to show the difference between the EU and US when it comes to venture capital. But clearly we realize that now China and other Asian countries are doing a lot more, and actually, as we've seen, that a lot of European founded the startup companies have not only left to this side of the Atlantic in order to find additional funding, but also more and more to Asia. So we clearly realize that, and that's one of the reasonings why we clearly need this European measure. That's clearly the beginning. The funding, the size of the funding, as we've seen already on the basis of the pilot, may not be enough. But it's not only just the EIC funding, but also the member states put their funding for the innovation, so that it's in total it's more, but clearly the need may be more. But what is the advantage is that clearly when I said that when it comes to, it's not only the grants but also the equity. And the idea is just to first to start with the putting the equity in the companies, but then getting out of those. So actually, then you can finance many more companies on your way, because then if you find already private investors who would be interested to finance into the equity of these companies, we can then get out of the companies and then use this money for the new companies. So which gives the opportunity, many more opportunities. Now, unfortunately, because I'm not personally involved in the process, so I can't reply to your question whether on the basis of that there are also something which MIT and DARPA can learn from us. So we are at the beginning of the road, but that's an interesting point. So perhaps I will inquire the colleagues that on the basis of the context and the sessions that they've had together with the US experts, whether there are any highlights there.
Hi, Henry Kelly, now working with Boston University. But I guess I'd like to ask Ms. Razzo, you kept talking about blended financing, and I wonder if you could be a little more specific about how that works. We've always had trouble in the U.S. with judging proposals on the basis of cost sharing, because the more cost share you have, the less likely it may be that you actually have an innovative idea that's not valued by the marketplace. So I'd be curious about how you address this problem.
No, actually, there is the what is now. It's just the beginning, because it's the really we launched the first pilot last October, which has the possibility also for the blended finance. And actually, what is first is assessed. Well, it's up to the companies whether they ask for just a grant or a blended finance. So the first assessment is by them whether they actually would like to have somebody else to become the owner of the company. So that's also the question. And then there will be a particular assessment then whether there is a need for a blended finance or not. And then on the basis of that, it will be decided whether it's grants only or the blended finance. And then there are the additional, also the additional aspects that will be then assessed, namely which would then concern the blended finance, because clearly if we will become a co-owner of the company, you'd like to know more, but anyway, on the background of the owners, on the the different aspects that are being assessed. But I'm afraid, as we've just started, we don't have any particular conclusions at this stage. But this may come up, and clearly then it would be also of interest to learn from the other experiences, particularly here.
Hey there, Cole Simons from ClearPath. I'm curious, as we're talking about developing markets and competitiveness, is there any collaboration happening between the European Innovation Council and, say, like the European Investment Bank and other export credit agencies or financing firms to help push this technology more broadly as you innovate it?
Well, actually, the part related to the equity will be linked with the EIB. So there will be a specific structure which will be built as part of the EIB, namely to deal with that, because that's not the purpose of the Commission, to become a co-owner of the company. So clearly we will need the financial institutions to be able to do that. So that's something which is being set up currently.
I'd like to ask a question of the American colleagues on the panel. Former Intel CEO Andy Grove has long called for a scaling bank for the United States to help scale innovations and produce them here in America. He's called on Congress to create a new federally chartered industrial financing organization Could be modeled on KfW in Germany, could be modeled on the EIC. Arguably, we have a similar model in RPE, but Jenny, John, Nick, what should the United States learn from what you've heard today here about what Europe is doing with the Innovation Council and its approach to scaling of innovative, promising companies?
I will not answer your question exactly, but I want to pair it with something that I had in mind. One of the most commendable things that I find in this operation in Europe is apparently the overcoming this problem of failure. So I wanted to ask how much is tolerance for failure is there in the program, because this is public money and many of these companies are going to fail. They're going to fall flat on their face. So the question is whether the political masters are able to take that thing. Obviously in the United States we have problems there.
A quick comment, which is about your question, Stephen. I think simply making the commitment of this amount of capital and stating this intention with this kind of medium to longer term time horizon positions the innovation agenda very squarely in the national conversation and in policy considerations. And I think that we've had a national innovation agenda that has been a little bit adrift of late, and what we can learn from the European experience as a model for how to reassert the importance of a public sector approach that creates a campfire around which many other things can happen, provided that it's well designed.
I'm going to agree with that, and to answer your question, I think just the sheer scale of what they're talking about in terms of dollars and efforts is something that we really should appreciate. I mean, I mentioned this scale-up FOA that RPE is putting out, and again, that's $50 million. That's nothing. And I can't believe there's not more of this going on. And it was a big deal for us to do that. So I absolutely believe that there is a lot of space for the U.S. to invest here. And it doesn't necessarily mean putting yet more money into it. We need to look at the balance of what we're funding in terms of research and innovation and think about, can we use our national labs more on the manufacturing side and the scale-up side? Are we doing that now? Who's working on what and how useful is it? And I think that balance is maybe a little bit off. And that's something that we really could look at, because I think we could do a lot better. You know, one of the caveats that our money comes with is a U.S. manufacturing clause. And that's really tough for a lot of companies, for a lot of startups. It may not make any sense for them to manufacture here. We may not necessarily even want that kind of manufacturing. And just to have that sort of blanket limitation is actually a real problem. I think that stifles innovation and that stops companies from moving forward. And if we're not prepared to pay to help them do it here, then what are we doing saying, well, you have to do it here, but we're not going to support you? Then it's not going to move forward at all. And then we don't even get the benefits of the solution, even if it's made somewhere else. So I think that we really need to seriously consider the implications of having these U.S. manufacturing clauses when we don't really support the U.S. manufacturing innovation and process. We need to do a better job at that.
One more question from me. You know, RPE is a wonderful program, as we've seen today. But of course, it was been zeroed out in virtually every Trump administration budget, and it's been put back in by Congress. So my question is and this is endemic, of course, of a broader ongoing U.S. political debate about the role of government and industrial policy and supporting innovation. But my question for Sid is what can the United States learn from Europe, where you do seem to have a political economy that is much more supportive across most political parties, that these types of investments make sense to drive the European economy and society forward? What lessons can we draw from how you have sold this initiative across Europe?
Well, clearly there have been a lot of discussions before there was agreement to have this kind of measure. Also discussions whether we really need to put public money in such a scale to the development of the private companies. But clearly the replies are there. That's the only way how we can drive further our competitiveness, but also how to have greater impact on the societies, namely in order to solve the issues that we are facing. the need was identified and actually agreed upon, which clearly then enables now to do much more than it has been the case before. Now, something about the acceptance of the failure, or also which was mentioned also before, and which we very often also realize that as compared to the US, the Europeans tend to be more risk averse, financial institutions particularly. And this was also one of the reasons we really need this kind of measures to take away some of the risks in case of high-risk companies, because the new innovative solutions are risky. We don't know whether they actually will create the markets or not. So always the risk is there that you fail, but you have to accept the risk. And really now we accept that not all of these companies will actually manage to get to the markets, but we also accept that quite a few of them will fail. And what is inherent there, that actually even if you put equity into the company, you can at all stages you can pull it out as well. So that's also the possibility which is there, which I think is also important.
Didn't make a final comment.
Oh. The robot is angry. Fix it. Okay. Let me make a okay. Let me make a brief comment on that. I just want to say that we may have been zeroed out every year by the new administration, but Congress also gave us more money every single time that has happened. So we do have broad bipartisan support in Congress, which we very much appreciate and thank them for. And in fact, we're getting to the point where we have so much money that we really should be starting new ARPAs. It doesn't make sense to have $1 billion ARPA. It makes sense to have 3 ARPAs that all equal $1 billion. We need an ARPA for infrastructure, for example. So I just wanted to say that. But, you know, on another note, when I think about, you know, the model in EU, I think that as everybody's been talking, this has been very interesting for me. I've thought about a couple things. One of them is that the scientists that I've worked with in my career from Europe have been the best scientists I've ever worked with. That is not the problem. The quality of science is extremely high. There has been a lot of money that has supported research in Europe, many times more so than here. It wasn't money. So why did innovation not move forward as quickly as it should have? When I looked at that, in my mind, it was people weren't working on the right things. So the question is, how do you get people working on the right things? And, you know, when I think about the size of the effort that you're putting out there, does it make sense to take 5% of that budget and form a couple of ARPAs, 3 or 4, whether they're regional or not, to address some of those key issues that you raised, whether it's transportation, whether it's cancer? Pick problems that need to be solved by, you know, most of the regions in the EU, and set up an ARPA that is autonomous, that is empowered, that is flat, all of the things that we have, because that's what enables you to have the culture where you truly can accept the risk and make those sort of moonshots and accept that 95% of what you fund is going to fail, but if you fail right, it drives you towards the correct solution. I think it would be fascinating for you to do that and then compare how those cultures are different from the main part of the, you know, the effort, and see in which areas that makes sense to do. I think that would be really interesting, and, you know, we've talked with quite a few different folks in the EU over the years, and I think there's an appetite for it. The ARP is not right for everything. You have to choose the problems you're trying to solve carefully, but I think that could be interesting.
John or Nick, final words.
There's another barrier that the EIC is in a position to address, which is it's part of the culture issue. You know, I think one of the obstacles to entrepreneurship and innovation in Europe is that young people have traditionally not looked at being an entrepreneur as a safe or desirable path necessarily. And one of the things about Silicon Valley is there's a profusion of role models of people who have succeeded. who are existent proofs of this. And this relates back to the issue of creating learning pathways and learning assets and educational experiences tailored for people who might become entrepreneurs. So this is about preparing the seedbed for the longer term play. And I think that cultural nuance goes hand in hand with availability of earlier stage capital and many of the other things we're talking about to create the hospitable kind of atmosphere.
Well, listen, I think this has been an absolutely great set of discussions and presentations. For me, it shows more than anything else how much innovation there really is in innovation policy. It also shows how hungry countries are for innovation-based economic growth and societal change. I think Europe is to be commended by being very thoughtful about looking at the Horizon 2020 program and looking at all points at which it can be innovative and improved in the future with Horizon Europe going forward and the European Innovation Council as part of it. Hopefully this has been a productive exchange for both sides. I think the U.S. interlocutors have learned much from the European approach, and hopefully we've given you some food for thought for continued program design. I want to thank all of you for coming. I want to say that the video will be posted online this afternoon. The presentations will also be online. And finally, I would like to first thank Mary Kavanaugh and her colleagues here at the European Union office in Washington, D.C. for alerting us that Cigna was going to come to town and proposing the idea for the event. Thank you. And then lastly, and most importantly, thank you to Cigna, Ginny, Nicholas, and John for a fantastic set of presentations.
Thank you.